Now, I'm not someone who's particularly interested in lost media. Sometimes it catches my fancy every once in a while, or I'll go down a quick little rabbit hole, but I'm not just chomping at the bit and just interested in every last piece of lost media thing that I find, like some people are. But there is one that is kind of interesting and I guess more near and dear to me. This is about Warhammer, and I'm not going to stop to explain every little thing. So you're just gonna have to roll with me on this because there's too much stuff to explain. So my favorite of the original Loyalist Space Marine legions has always been the Iron Hands because they are cyborg Space Marines and robots are cool and they have a cool color scheme and they're massively underrated and they never get the love that they deserve. So one day while I was doing a little wiki diving on the Iron Hands to see if there was anything interesting I could I could find about them, I found a list of their successor chapters. I'm not you can think of successor chapters as being like uh splinter subdivisions of the original legions, and now some of those legions have like a million successor chapters, like the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels. They've got like a gajillion successors who are like descended or divided out from them, because those are like the big, important, cool main character factions of the Space Marines. But some of them, like the Iron Hands, have only a very small handful. And on this list, one of them caught my eye, mainly because there was a little tag next to it that said it was unverified. Now, it's not too uncommon for a successor chapter to have unverified heritage because 40k takes place over such a long time span that sometimes it's either become lost to time, which is the in-universe justification. Sometimes they just haven't said what it is, and sometimes it's kept intentionally mysterious, like the Blood Ravens from Dawn of War, who don't know what chapter they're descended from. So I did a little looking into this unverified successor of the Iron Hands, the Steel Confessors. And what I found was actually a lot more interesting than I was expecting. I sort of assumed that it was just, oh, probably some chapter that got mentioned as a one-off and in some White Dwarf magazine or a book or something like that, and people are just theorizing that they are connected to the Iron Hands for whatever reason. But no, the story actually goes much further into the real world. So the Steel Confessors were a chapter that were created for an event in 2005 that was held at the Event Center in Birmingham, England, specifically the 2005 Games Day and Golden Demon. Golden Demon being a miniature painting contest, and Games Day being a day where you can play games. Namely, their big event being the Mega Battle, the Battle for Kalevala. The idea being that you would come in and there would be a number of Warhammer games going on between the Steel Confessor Space Marines and the Tyranids, and then you would play your game, and then whoever would win their game would add a tally to their side, and then at the end of the day it would be tallied up, and whoever won. I don't know what they did at the end of it. But these Steel Confessors were created specifically for this event, and it wasn't just like the little miniatures that were made for it. There were actually two pretty sizable statues that were created, a statue and a bust. There was a full-scale, something like 6 foot tall statue of a space marine that was built and painted specifically to represent the Steel Confessors. Now, at this event, which assumedly a good number of people attended, there was a leaflet which contained, I'm assuming, information about the event, but also a backstory for the Steel Confessors. Now, this would have been basically official lore, seeing as it was ostensibly an official event and leaflet. But oddly enough, the leaflet has been seemingly totally lost to time. If you go to the Fandom 40k wiki, you'll find just pages and pages of lore about the Steel Confessors, all of which is practically fan fiction. It is based off of an Angel Fire website that was created to supposedly recount what was in the what was in this leaflet, but it has never been verified. There are no images of it. Again, it might as well be fan fiction. Now, their backstory might not be confirmed at all, but they definitely do exist. In fact, they have been mentioned in at least one other material, that, fun enough, being Soul Hunter, the first book in the Night Lords trilogy, and actually one of my favorite 40k books. So in Soul Hunter, it's about the Night Lords of the Night Lords trilogy. Isn't that crazy? The Night Lords pillage lots of equipment and supplies off of other people who they prey on, ships and such. And at one point in the book, the main character, Talos, is recalling all of the different parts of his armor and where he got them from, including what he calls the Broken Steel Confessors chapter. It's either broken or crippled Steel Confessors chapter. I don't feel like busting out the book to check. So that's a funny connection, because I already thought that they were kind of interesting because they had this sort of strange lost media backstory to to their origins, as well as the fact that they have a connection to the Night Lords, which are my favorite Chaos Space Marine Legion, because of their one other mention in that book. So because of this, they've sort of just become endeared to me over time, because I find that whole lost media element to them to be very unique. And it's something that I almost would prefer if it stayed lost, because I find that more interesting about them. It's just something that I personally have an investment in. And as I've thought about these Steel Confessors, and they've slowly become sort of like unofficially like one of my, I guess, just a personal favorite chapter, I started to kind of think of, they sort of helped me understand the property of Warhammer in a different way. It also came from discovering a number of really great YouTube channels, such as Arbiter Ian and Snipe and Wib, who focus a lot more on the older, more classic 80s and early 90s part of Warhammer history, which is really fun. Fun and goofy and weird. And one thing that gave me a real appreciation for was the perspective that I think has been lost a little bit in modern times. So nowadays, a lot of people get into the hobby and they get into Warhammer, and they sort of think of it almost as like something like a cinematic universe, that kind of thing, like the way you'd approach comics or anything else with interconnected media. The people think about every expansion, or sorry, not expansion, every edition as being like a story arc of some kind, and they get upset when like a character gets introduced and doesn't really do anything for the edition and all that. And for a while, I also engaged with it in a similar way, but going back and looking at the old way that it used to be considered, sort of older mindsets about the hobby, kind of gave me a different. It made me rethink that a little bit. Oh, I think a lot of people engage with the property like that because most people probably just engage with it through things like games or books or uninformed YouTube lore channels or dubiously fact-check wiki articles, as opposed to something like the actual tabletop game. And really, everything in 40k and Warhammer in general, including fantasy and everything GW puts out, is not so much meant to create a big overarching story. It's meant to sell you little plastic miniatures for you to paint up. Miniatures and miniature wargaming is really a creative hobby, and the reason that all of these different chapters and successors and little subdivisions and stuff like that exist is because you're not meant to know about all of them. You're meant to it's there to give you the space to come up with your own characters and your own groups and stories. And in that way, it kind of reframed the way that I look at things like the Steel Confessors or other other parts of the universe that have uh, only, a few lines of description given to them. Like all these little Space Marine chapters, for instance, with a line of dialogue or a single sentence about them, like a battle they took place in, or the battle they took part in like a White Dwarf article or something like that. That's not lore that isn't fleshed out. It's a writing prompt. It's there for you to take a name and a theme, maybe, or a color scheme, and start thinking about that so that you can put something down that you yourself have made. And so, with a chapter like the Steel Confessors, someone who is a group that's literally missing official lore that was here and then gone and lost, it's almost like they are the most appropriate to do that to come up with your own story or my own story. And so that's exactly what I did. This is my Steel Confessor Space Marine. My webcam hates focusing on things that are close to it, so I'll just put some images up on the screen while I'm talking. I just painted him. I have another one back there, and I'm gonna paint a whole set of them. So I came up with a whole original backstory and a whole new deal for these guys. And I'm going to force you to indulge in listening to my Warhammer 40k fanfiction for a second. So I kind of wanted to take the basic idea of the Steel Confessors as this as an Iron Hand successor chapter, but I also wanted to work in some of the things that I personally found interesting about them, namely the lost media aspect of their real world backstory. And so I came up with a new origin point for them. So that being that they were a group of Iron Hands at the Battle of Isstvan V, the Isstvan Drop Site Massacre, where a large percentage of the Iron Hands forces were wiped out in the kind of initial conflict of the Horus Heresy, the big Space Marine Civil War. These are Iron Hands who pulled out of the battle and fled into the warp for one reason or another, either to get reinforcements or just to flee from battle. While they were in the warp, they ended up getting lost. The warp it kind of exists outside of physical material reality. It's called the immaterium, and it's not uncommon for ships to get lost in it, just the way that ships in the real world could get lost at sea. Except in the warp, things like time and space get kind of funky, meaning that you can be gone for what feels like hundreds of years to you, but could only be a few days to another planet or something like that. So they get lost for some time that they can't really keep track of. And when they come out, the Horus Heresy is already over. They've missed the entire war, and they're pretty much just there to enter the Imperium and try to help out and pick up the pieces and figure out what the heck has gone down in the roughly 7 Earth years that they were missing. But now that they've emerged from the warp, they discover that something kind of terrifying has happened to them. While they were in there, they, as a group, came under what they call the blanking, which is a memory loss, amnesia curse, essentially. The blanking means that at some point, repeatedly, they don't know how often or when exactly, or what triggers it, every single one of them will lose some amount of their memory. They won't know how much. They could lose a couple minutes. They won't know what they were doing, or they could have lost a couple days. Some of them lose entire years of their lives. This is extremely scary to them, and one of the things which none of them can remember is who they were before they entered the warp initially. They've forgotten that they were Iron Hands. They've forgotten that they fled from battle or why they fled from battle. All they know is that now they have this they have differently colored armor. I don't know. It's just let them just have a new color scheme. They got busy while they were in the warp. Thus, because they don't know when they're going to lose their memory or how much they're going to lose at any given time, they make it a habit to regularly check in with the one single member of the chapter who does not seem to be affected by the memory loss curse as much, if at all, as anyone else. That would be their chapter's chaplain. I know I didn't come up with a name for him, but he would ostensibly be an important character, I guess, if there were stories about this. If I decided to write stories about this. Because of his special position, he is known as the eidetiker, which is a term that means the person who remembers, because his job is for when other people come to him, they essentially recite their memories from that point, they recite their memories from the last time they saw him to the current point in time, and then he records all of it. In this way, it's kind of like they are going to their chaplain for confession, to like confess their memories, like they're steel confessors, and that's why they choose to call themselves that. So they are rabidly obsessed with recording the details of their lives in case they forget it. They are super anal about preserving history and events. And their main overarching goal as a chapter is to, one, find a way to reverse the blanking curse, if it's at all possible, and two, to figure out their origins and who they were before they entered the warp. And then, I don't know, I guess they would go on like little adventures and stuff like that. And you could write 18 books about it, like all the other Black Library stuff. Thank you for listening to my unofficial Warhammer fanfiction, where I tried to incorporate elements from their real life backstory into their little fanfiction backstory. It's fun. It's fun to come up with with your own stories and characters and stuff. And I would totally recommend that you do it also. It might sound a little goofy or uninteresting, but if there's an idea that really catches your attention, it can't hurt to come up with, you know, some playful little lore for something. Yeah.